Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
It started the way most things do in my family, quietly, without announcement, like a decision had already been made somewhere behind a closed door I never got to enter. I was sitting on my porch with a bottle of wine I'd been saving for the promotion, the cork still in it, when the text came through. My mother, always concise when it mattered most, had written, "Logan needs a win right now. Be understanding. We're going on the cruise with him. Love you." That was it. No apology, no "we're proud of you," or "can we celebrate another day?" Just a half-hearted excuse for ditching their daughter's most important day in 39 years, tied up with a fake bow of "love you." I sat there and read it again, then again, as if more repetition would turn it into something else. Something it never was and never would be. This wasn't a first offense. This wasn't even the worst. It was just the moment I finally stopped pretending. Growing up, I had two roles: be quiet and be good. I did both. I got the grades, I stayed out of trouble, I went to therapy when mom thought I seemed tense at 13, and I put away my own birthday cake one year when Logan smashed it during a tantrum. They always said he was sensitive, like that explained everything. His mistakes were phases, his blow-ups were stress. And somehow, every time he lit another emotional fire, it became my job to bring the water. I remember once, maybe I was 12, maybe 13, when Logan stole money from Dad's wallet and blamed me. I didn't say anything. I didn't even try to defend myself, because by then I already knew the choreography. Logan acts out, Mom soothes him, Dad stays quiet, and Danielle learns to live with it. That night, I went to bed without dinner because they said they were disappointed in me. Years later, Dad found the money in Logan's room. Nobody said a word about it. The silence was supposed to be enough of a fix, but it never fixed a thing. By the time I hit college, I'd figured it out. I could never compete with chaos. People don't gather around the steady flame. They gather around the explosion. Logan was the explosion. I was the pilot light. And I had learned to burn quietly. So when I got the promotion, director of operations, after 15 years of being the invisible glue holding that place together, I thought maybe, just maybe, it was my turn to be seen. I rented out a small private room at a restaurant I'd always loved, but never dared to treat myself to. I sent out invitations, I ordered a cake. I even printed place cards like some kind of Hallmark version of a daughter, hoping they'd feel the weight of the effort. Logan said he wasn't sure he could make it. Mom said, "He's going through a lot." Dad just said, "Let's see how the week shakes out." They never RSVP'd, not officially, but I hoped. Of course I hoped. Hope is a hard habit to break, especially when you've been starved of attention for so long you start mistaking crumbs for a feast. Then came that text. The cruise had been booked. The money had been spent. Logan had a new girlfriend who worked in wellness, and she'd found a package last minute to Mexico. Supposedly, he needed the ocean, the detox, the distance from bad vibes. So my mother packed her best sun hat and told me to be understanding. I looked at the unopened bottle of wine and the printed guest list that still had their names right at the top, like I was still stupid enough to believe they'd show. I poured the wine anyway, cheap red from the back of the cabinet, not the good stuff, and sat with the realization that I was almost 40 years old and still waiting for my parents to choose me. The party happened. It was nice. My friends came. My boss gave a speech that made me cry, not because of the words, but because they felt more like family than my own blood ever had. People toasted. They laughed. We even danced. But I didn't open the gift bag I'd prepared for my parents. I left it under the table and walked away without it, like you leave behind a pair of shoes that never quite fit. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I opened my laptop and pulled up the document I'd always ignored: emergency contacts. I stared at the form. Mom and Dad had always been there. Even after everything, I'd left them listed out of habit or laziness or something that felt like loyalty but was really just fear. Fear of being alone, fear of being unreachable. But that night, something shifted. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even pour another drink. I just started typing. First, I removed their names. Then I added my coworker Jen, who'd once driven me to urgent care when I sprained my ankle and waited 3 hours with me just to make sure I got home okay. Then I opened my legal files. Healthcare proxy, power of attorney, will, all of it. I changed everything. You don't announce peace, you just make it. And sometimes peace looks a lot like distance. When I finally shut the laptop, it was past midnight. The apartment was silent. No calls, no texts, no apologies, just the dull hum of the fridge and a kind of clarity I hadn't felt since I was a teenager hiding in the laundry room while Logan broke dishes in the kitchen and Mom told me not to provoke him. They would never see me the way I deserved to be seen. But that didn't mean I had to keep standing in front of them begging, so I stopped. Just like that. And I swear to you, the silence that followed, it felt like freedom. The morning after the promotion party, I didn't wake up with a hangover or a head full of regret. I woke up with a purpose that felt sharper than anything I'd felt in years. There was no dramatic soundtrack, no cinematic moment where I stared into the mirror and whispered something about new beginnings. It was quieter than that, more mechanical. The way you might feel after finally cleaning a closet that's been piled up with junk for 20 years. I got out of bed, made a cup of coffee, and opened my laptop like I was clocking in for work. Only this time, the job was my life. Or at least the version of it I was no longer willing to give to people who didn't earn it. I started with the obvious things. Emergency contacts. It's one of those parts of adulthood nobody really thinks about unless they're facing surgery or travel. But I'd always left my parents listed there, out of habit or guilt, or maybe because I'd bought into the belief that if things ever really got bad, they'd show up. But now I knew better. If I had a car accident on the highway or collapsed in a grocery store aisle, the last thing I wanted was my mother arriving and blaming me for the timing or my father sighing like I'd somehow inconvenienced his day. I deleted both of their names with the same finality you might feel emptying a trash folder. No big moment, just click, click, gone. Next came the legal stuff. I'd set up a basic healthcare proxy years ago when I had a minor surgery. I'd filled in my mother's name on the line because it seemed easier than asking a friend or a lawyer. She was my mother after all. That was supposed to mean something. But I remembered how she didn't come to the hospital until 3 hours after my procedure. And even then, she acted as if sitting in the waiting room had been some unbearable sacrifice. She spent more time scrolling through vacation rentals than asking how I felt. So I pulled up the document, logged into my digital legal portal, and erased her name. In her place, I listed Jen, my coworker, my closest friend, and the only person who had ever made me soup when I was sick without needing to be asked. There was something deeply satisfying about the process. Not angry, not vindictive, but surgical, precise. Every click was a stitch being removed from a wound that had been sewn shut too tight. I wasn't burning bridges, I wasn't throwing tantrums, I was just walking away from them quietly. If they ever even noticed, I imagined it would be weeks from now, maybe months, maybe never. That was part of the relief, knowing that nothing I was doing required their permission or even their awareness. By noon, I'd moved on to my will. Not that I had some sprawling estate or millions in savings, but I had enough, a condo with equity, a decent retirement fund, personal belongings I actually cared about. I used to have my father listed as executor. Again, default, assumed responsibility. I changed it to a local attorney I trusted, a woman who had helped me set up my original paperwork years ago and always took my calls within a day. I left a few personal notes too, in the if necessary sections. I didn't include anything spiteful or cruel, just facts, where I wanted things to go, what I wanted done with the things that mattered, and who didn't need to be involved anymore. Midway through updating my digital password manager, I got a call from Logan. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail that started with a lazy, "Hey," and then transitioned into a rambling half-apology about how he knew Mom and Dad skipping my party was kind of rough, but that he was really struggling lately and needed something on to hop top pun to look forward to. He said the cruise was amazing, that the hotel had an open bar and yoga on the roof, and that I'd totally love it if I wasn't so tense all the time. Then he asked if I could spot him $200 because his debit card was giving him issues. I didn't call back. I didn't even listen to the message all the way through. I just hit delete and moved on to the next task. Social media was the last frontier. I unfollowed them, quietly, no drama, no blocking, just the digital equivalent of stepping out of a room and shutting the door behind you. I stopped liking their vacation posts, stopped pretending to care about Logan's wellness journey or Mom's quotes about family being everything that she never seemed to believe in when it came to me. I wasn't angry, I was finished. There's a difference. By the time the sun went down, I had deleted or replaced almost every legal, logistical, or emotional tie they had to my life. I'd backed up my documents, made a hard copy for the safe, and sent my lawyer a note confirming the changes. I made dinner. I watched an episode of some mindless TV show. I went to bed without anxiety gnawing at the edge of my thoughts. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't rebellion. It was maintenance, cleaning house. What struck me most was how simple it had been, how little resistance I felt, like the part of me that used to beg for scraps had finally starved to death. And what was left was someone far quieter, far colder, and, ironically, far more alive. I didn't feel guilty, I didn't second guess, I felt done. And that was the first time in a very long time that I slept through the entire night. I was standing in the kitchen, staring into the empty sink like it might give me an answer to a question I hadn't asked out loud, when my phone started buzzing on the counter. It wasn't a number I recognized, but the area code was familiar, local, close. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. I almost didn't pick it up. I should have trusted that instinct. But something in me, maybe that old version of myself still lingering in the bones, reached for the phone anyway and slid a finger across the screen. The voice on the other end was a nurse, calm but clipped, reading from a script she probably used a dozen times a week. My father had been brought in with chest pains, possible cardiac event. He was stable for now, but needed to be admitted for observation. They were trying to reach his next of kin for consent forms and updates. I asked how they got my number, and she told me it had been listed in his phone under daughter, but that when they pulled up his official paperwork, my name wasn't on any of the forms. Power of attorney, not me. Emergency contact, not me. Medical decision maker, also not me. I told her that wasn't a mistake and hung up before she could ask any more questions. The silence that followed was almost comical. I stood in my own kitchen, the same space where I'd made coffee that morning and opened bills and checked emails, now suddenly the scene of a quiet, unexpected reckoning. Not for me, no, I'd made my peace, but for them. For the people who had, for decades, assumed I'd always be there just because I always had been. And now, for the first time, they were trying to cash in on a sense of loyalty they'd never actually invested in. I didn't rush to the hospital. I didn't change out of my leggings or grab my keys or rehearse a concerned speech. I made tea. I sat down. I breathed. I let the moment be what it was, a reflection of a decision I'd already made. I didn't need to scream or cry or tell anyone about it. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was quieter than that. Heavier, like watching someone finally notice the hole in their own roof after you'd been handing them buckets during every storm for years, and they'd just kept blaming the weather. A few hours passed. I watched a documentary I can't remember the name of, scrolled through some photos from the promotion party, and considered starting a new puzzle that had been sitting unopened on my shelf for months. Then my voicemail dinged. It was my mother's voice this time, trembling and sharp at once, the way it always was when things didn't go according to her script. She said Dad was asking for me, that Logan was at the hospital but not really able to cope, which I interpreted to mean he'd either left or was sulking in a chair with his headphones in. She said the doctors needed consent for a minor procedure and asked why I wasn't listed on any of the forms. There was a beat of real confusion in her voice then, like it had just occurred to her that I might have done something intentional. She ended the message with a hurried, "Call me back, Danielle, please." But I didn't call, I didn't text, I didn't even listen to the whole message again. I just sat there and let the weight of it settle into the room like dust. It wasn't about revenge. Not in the way people usually imagine it, screaming matches, slammed doors, some dramatic final monologue. No, what I was doing was far more dangerous, and was taking myself out of the equation so completely that they couldn't even argue with me anymore. I was making myself a ghost while still being very much alive. Around 9 o'clock, my phone buzzed again. Another call, another voicemail. This time, it was Logan. The audio was messy, a little slurred. He sounded tired or high or both. He mumbled something about Dad being in and out of tests, and that Mom's freaking out, and that they really needed me there because this is the kind of stuff you're good at. I laughed out loud when I heard that part. The kind of stuff I'm good at, like being the adult, like holding up the ceiling while everyone else lit fires in the basement, like putting aside whatever I was feeling to manage their crisis. He said he didn't know what to do. He said Mom was asking if I'd come. He said I should just let it go, that the party thing wasn't that deep, and that Dad was sick, and that maybe we could just hit reset. He still didn't get it. None of them did. This wasn't about the party. It wasn't about the cruise, or the cake I never served, or the way Mom had casually used the phrase, "be understanding," like I was some school counselor, not her daughter. It was about the years stacked on top of each other, like bricks in a wall I had finally walked away from. It was about being invisible until they needed a life raft. I didn't call him back either. I put the phone face down and walked into the bedroom, where I turned off the lights and lay in the dark. I imagined them in the hospital room, my mother pacing, Logan scrolling, my father hooked up to machines he didn't understand. And I felt nothing. Not anger, not joy, just nothing. And that's what scared me in a way. Not that I was angry or hurt, but that I wasn't anymore. That there was a version of me still out there they all thought they could summon when it suited them. And that version of me? She didn't exist anymore. She had left the building. She had deleted her number. She had updated her documents and redrawn the map. And now they were left to read the directions for the first time, without me. The knock on my door came late. Later than decency usually allows, and louder than any polite visitor would choose. I knew it was her before I even stood up. Something in the rhythm of the knock, something in the silence that followed, told me this wasn't a delivery or a neighbor with a misplaced package. I moved slowly, not from hesitation, but from an eerie calm that had taken root inside me over the past week. I opened the door, and there she was. My mother, her eyes wide with urgency, her face pale and drawn, makeup still on from the day, but slightly smudged, like she hadn't had time to redo it or simply didn't care. She didn't ask to come in. She walked in like it was still her house, like this space somehow still belonged to her, in the way she believed I still did. She dropped her purse on the hallway table, the same way she always used to when she visited during the holidays, and turned to look at me with that mixture of desperation and righteous indignation that she wore like perfume. "I didn't know," she said, her voice already raised and defensive. "I didn't know you'd taken your name off everything. What were you thinking, Danielle?" I didn't answer right away. I walked past her into the kitchen, pulled down 2 mugs, and began boiling water. I wasn't doing it to be hospitable. I was doing it to anchor myself, to keep my hands moving, to remind myself that I still had control over the space, the moment, and the conversation that I already knew was going to be messier than she could handle. She stood in the doorway behind me, arms crossed tightly, not out of cold but habit. The posture of a woman who had spent her entire life guarding her own narrative from anyone who might threaten it. "You could have at least warned us," she said, the second attempt sharper, the hint of accusation more distinct. "Your father was in pain, Danielle. Real pain. The hospital needed a signature. Logan couldn't handle it. He was falling apart." I set the mugs down and looked at her across the counter. watching how her eyes darted around the room like she was searching for the version of me she used to know, the one who would fold under pressure, who would soften at the first sign of distress, who would jump back into the fire just because someone else was cold. That woman was gone, and all that remained was me, dry, steady, and unwilling. "You told me he needed a win," I said quietly but without hesitation. "You told me to be understanding." And I finally was. My mother blinked, like she hadn't expected that kind of clarity. She sat down slowly at the kitchen table, deflating as she did, and ran a hand through her hair like she needed the gesture to keep her upright. "I didn't mean for it to hurt you," she said, but the words sounded rehearsed, like she'd tried them out in the car on the way over. "You know how Logan is. You know how hard things have been for him." I poured the hot water into the mugs, dropped the tea bags in, and slid hers across the table without ceremony. I didn't sit down. I leaned against the counter and looked at her without blinking. "I've always known how Logan is," I said. "That's the problem. He gets a pass because you're always writing his excuses, and you've never had to write mine because I didn't give you anything to clean up, so I got nothing." She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand and kept going. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't snap. I just told the truth finally, in full sentences that had been stuck in my throat since I was old enough to notice the difference in how we were treated. "You gave him chaos and called it personality. You gave me silence and called it strength. You think because I didn't act out, I didn't need anything, but I did. I needed you to show up, not just when things were burning, but when they were good, when I had something to celebrate, when I asked you to see me." My mother's face tightened. She looked down into her tea like it might hide her shame, but I knew better. Shame doesn't live long in people who practice denial like religion. "You don't understand what it's like to have a child like Logan," she said, and I let out a soft, incredulous laugh that made her flinch. "No," I said, "but I do understand what it's like to have a mother like you." That silence between us then was heavy, thick, like a curtain finally being pulled away to reveal the ruined set behind the performance. I stood there and let her feel it, let her sit in the discomfort of knowing that her version of motherhood had left bruises she had never even acknowledged. Not because she was cruel, at least not intentionally, but because she had made herself the hero in a story where I was always a supporting character. "I'm not angry," I said finally, softly. "I'm just not willing to keep playing my part. You wrote Logan as the one who needed saving. You never asked what that made me." She didn't answer, and I didn't expect her to. The truth was, I don't think she'd ever really thought of me outside of that role. The steady one, the responsible one, the daughter who didn't make trouble. But I wasn't playing it anymore. I had walked off the stage, and the show was over. When she left that night, she didn't hug me. She didn't even finish her tea. She stood, collected her things, and gave me one last long look. One part confusion, one part grief, and one part fear, because I think somewhere in her, she realized what I had done wasn't a punishment. It was a release. And I had no intention of coming back. The day after my mother left my apartment without a word, without even pretending to patch the cracks she had helped carve into our relationship, I didn't expect to see anyone else from my family for a long time. I assumed, perhaps foolishly, that her silence meant a retreat, that she had accepted what I said, or at least understood enough of it to know that pressing me again would only harden the walls I had already built. But less than 24 hours later, there was another knock at my door, this one more hesitant, with a rhythm I didn't recognize immediately. When I opened it, I found Logan standing there, hands shoved in the pockets of a hoodie 2 sizes too big, his eyes bloodshot and his mouth pulled into something halfway between a grimace and a question. I almost didn't let him in. Part of me, the part that had finally settled into the quiet of a life without their chaos, wanted to close the door gently and pretend I hadn't heard it. But another part, the one that had always wondered whether he even knew the damage he left in his wake, cracked the door open and stepped aside. He didn't speak right away. He just walked in, slow and unsure, like he was stepping into a stranger's house, not his sister's apartment. He stood in the living room, eyes scanning the space like he was taking inventory of who I had become since the last time he bothered to look closely. He didn't sit, he didn't ask. He just stood there, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, fidgeting with the zipper of his hoodie. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than I expected, almost brittle, like he wasn't sure he believed what he was about to say. "I know I've messed up," he began, his tone less defensive than usual, which surprised me more than the fact that he was here at all. I know I've taken up a lot of space, more than I should have." I leaned against the wall near the window, arms crossed, not because I was angry, but because I needed something to hold me up in case this turned into another one of his long-winded monologues about how hard life had been for him. He looked down at his shoes and then back up at me, eyes wide in a way that suggested he might actually be trying to see me this time. "I didn't realize how much you did," he continued, "for all of us, for me. When Mom called me freaking out at the hospital because nobody knew what to do and you weren't there, I didn't know what to say. Because you were always the one who knew. You were the one who showed up, even when you shouldn't have had to." His voice cracked a little, and I watched as he struggled to keep it together, but I didn't move to comfort him. I wasn't cruel, but I wasn't going to play the old role either, the one where I step in to soothe everyone else's guilt, wrap it up in forgiveness, and send them on their way like nothing ever happened. That script was no longer mine to read. He finally sat down on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, hands clasped in front of him like he was in a confessional. He looked up at me again, this time without the usual smirk or bravado that he wore like armor. He looked small, not physically, but emotionally. For the first time in a very long time, Logan looked like he understood that the world didn't revolve around his needs, his disasters, or his sense of urgency. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. I needed to say something. I needed you to know that I get it now, or I'm starting to." For a long moment, I said nothing. I watched him, measured the space between us, not in feet or inches, but in years of invisible labor I had done on his behalf without ever being asked. I thought about all the times I had canceled plans, soothed our mother's anxiety, translated his mood swings into manageable explanations, and absorbed the impact of every emotional explosion he detonated in the name of being overwhelmed. When I finally spoke, my voice was level, clear, not angry, not cold, just resolute. "I'm not angry anymore, Logan," I said, watching his eyes widen at the unexpected softness in my tone. "But I'm not responsible for you either. I'm not your fallback plan. I'm not the fixer. I'm not the one who keeps things from falling apart just because you don't know how to hold them together." He opened his mouth to protest, but I held up a hand and continued before he could interrupt. "I spent years trying to earn something from Mom and Dad that was never mine to claim. I thought if I was perfect, if I was reliable, if I made myself indispensable, then maybe I'd be seen. Not just noticed, but really seen. And I kept doing that even as they rewarded you for falling apart and punished me for holding it together." He sat still, his hands trembling slightly. I don't think he had ever heard me speak like this. Not because I hadn't thought these things, but because I had never allowed myself to say them out loud. But now the words came easily, without the weight of shame or fear. "I'm not doing it anymore," I said. "I don't hate you, but I can't carry you. I'm done being the safety net for people who never once looked down to see if I needed one too." Logan nodded slowly, like he understood the meaning, even if he didn't fully grasp the gravity of what it meant. He stood up, adjusted his hoodie, and offered a quiet, broken thank you before walking toward the door. He didn't ask to stay. He didn't ask for money. He didn't even ask when he'd see me again. And for the first time in our entire lives, that felt like growth. When the door clicked shut behind him, I sat down on the same couch and stared out the window. The street below was quiet, empty except for the occasional dog walker or distant engine hum. I felt no rush of victory, no swell of pride. I just felt still, not happy, not sad, just still. People talk about freedom like it's this fireworks moment, bright, loud, exhilarating. But for me, freedom tasted like nothing. No ache, no hunger, no endless hope waiting to be crushed. Just the absence of need, the clean, flat silence of finally not waiting for the people who never chose me to choose me. And in that stillness, I knew I had finally walked out of a room I'd been locked inside for far too long, and I never looked back.